I don't even know what happened, guys. That was supposed to be an intro, but it didn't happen. That's okay. So what's up, everybody? It's your boy Reggie Casual from TheCasual.co, and it's really good to be with you guys again. So today we actually have a special guest, right? Um, uh, I was really just mulling over this idea of the punk influences in fashion, and I was like, who can I talk to that could honestly give me a little bit more insight? So I was going over on YouTube and I was watching some people and I was just like, okay, learning more about, punk influences in fashion. And then all of a sudden I was like, yo, this dude Karsten, I know who this guy is, right? And so I was like, let's get him on the show. Let's talk to him. So I want to go ahead and introduce you to a great mind in fashion, in the space, my man, Karsten Kroening. Kroening, his name is Kroening.
Yeah, what's good?
Right? So I
Karsten
know a
Kroening.
lot. I know a lot of people. We were actually having a conversation before we got live about how do you actually pronounce your name, and so that was our little short conversation. So if you could go ahead and let everybody know who you are, where you come from, and what it is that you do.
Yeah, my name is Karsten Kroening. I am a fashion YouTuber. I'm on Instagram. I make fashion memes, and I've been doing that for years. But mainly, a lot of my fashion YouTube has been around like design history, certain designers' history, and really the relationship between fashion and music, and just providing an angle on that.
What actually got you started into this scene, my man? Like, what got you to this point where you were like, yo, I want to do fashion. Like, I want to talk about this.
When I was like 16, what I really loved was music and like just really punk music at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started collecting band tees from thrift stores pretty much. And I found out they were a lot of money sometimes. And that was kind of crazy to me. Like, oh, I found this really cool band tee from 1982 and I found out I could sell it on eBay for a lot of money. Or also this platform called Grailed at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me into exposed to certain designers such as like Fear of God was really big at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
was obviously aware of certain designers from like school or whatever. There were always people wearing vape at school, or like I remember when I first started dressing well, people were really into like the Margiela Futures.
Mm.
But um, what really got me invested in the culture was just Raph Simmons, because he used some of the graphics from some of my favorite bands at the time, like Joy Division,
Mm-hmm.
uh, New Order, Bauhaus, that kind of stuff. So that's what got me invested, because I remember selling band tees that me and my friends would go thrifting for on Grailed. And then I saw a New Order parka on the front page. I was like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. I wonder if I could buy that. And it was like $10,000. I was like, no way, that's happening.
I'm not buying
But
that.
it got me invested into the culture of fashion. And I soon found out about like Undercover and other things that were adjacent to a lot of the music I was listening to. They had references, and it seemed to be of a similar vein, and it usually had some of the graphics from some of my favorite albums, so it became really interesting to me, and that's kind of what got me into fashion.
That's real interesting because I come from a different angle entirely. Like for me, I guess you could say in the same kind of way, but in a from a different perspective. When I was first getting into fashion, my big thing was, I was big into hip hop, right? But one of the things that what was weird about it is I was really into a lot of backpack hip hop and a lot of crossover stuff. And so when I was involved in it, it was just like I wanted to. I guess my defining moment was Pharrell NERD, where it was like this kind of crossover between rock and hip hop and punk and skate, and that was really like my scene. But when I was living at the time, I was living in Atlanta. That really wasn't the scene for most of Atlanta at the time because I was a California kid who moved to Atlanta. So the whole dynamic changed for me. And so I guess once I got involved in following those guys, Pharrell's, the Lupe Fiascos, I wanted to dig deeper, and I found out that a lot of the labels that they were into were Japanese labels, right? So that's when I found out about Bape, and then at that time, Bape was like big, but I was more interested in some of the more I don't want to say eclectic stuff, but a little bit more involved. I could say I was really about that, and so what I ended up doing is I found out about Jun Takahashi and I found out about Jin Watanabe, and I was just like, okay, yeah, like this is my speed. This is where I'm at. This is what I want to do. And far be it for me to like just talk bloviate about Jun Takahashi. When I watched your video on Jun Takahashi and just like the punk influences and coming from you, like you were involved in that scene. When you found out about like these designers, whether it be Jun Takahashi, Vivienne Westwood, or Margiela, what was like your first reaction to them when you were just kind of getting your feet wet in fashion?
Well, oh my god, it was like the coolest thing in the world to me at the time. I was also into hip hop at the time as well as punk,
Right.
which was kind of the beautiful thing about the time I grew up was I could be involved in both of those scenes at the same time. So I also loved like Kanye, for example, and I took some style cues from him. But like seeing punk designs and these bands that I loved, which weren't as popular
Mm.
to maybe a mainstream audience as much as you could find like something Kanye would wear, but finding like these graphics or references in such a cool way to me that was just outside the box and unique just got me super excited because it was like, okay, you're seeing these graphics not just done on a t-shirt because in the punk world, everything is on like really a t-shirt if you're gonna have a graphic, unless you want to wear like a leather coat and dye your hair and get a
Mm-hmm.
mohawk or something crazy like that. And I don't know, I was never into that, but I was super into the way that clothes could express your style.
Right.
And so to find just these really interesting designs with these references to these bands you really resonated with just blew my mind and drove me crazy because it was like we're not just taking, for example, the imagery of the band, but maybe we're also taking the ideas from it. You know, we're kind of cutting up the. I think of Jun Takahashi. One of the collections that I thought was super cool was he did a collab with this band called Television, which may or may not have been authorized, but the way he used those graphics was he actually cut it up and kind of in a linear way, and he put strips of each graphic, like
Mm-hmm.
removed garments. That was just super cool to me because it reflected on the way that the band was. It was super different. It didn't necessarily do things in a straight way. It was kind of like almost cut up like June's design in a way. So I
Mm.
just really appreciated that element of all of these just different designers, not only taking the references and images of the band, but also kind of taking their spirit in a way.
Mm. And I want to reference something that you actually mentioned before. You were talking about how like, you know, I wasn't really into like, dye my hair and things of that nature. I think this is one of the things that a lot of people get confused about punk influence. Like when we see the popular mainstream images of punk, it's these people with mohawks, their hair is dyed, it's pink, it's blue, it's red. What are, just off the top, what are some of the misconceptions about the idea of the punk subculture, which if I'm being more technical, it wasn't really called that. It was kind of labeled that, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
So the thing about punk subculture is that it's like a tree with many roots. You can label so many different things and so many different genres punk. I mean,
Mm,
if you're to look today at like the way we say the word alternative,
mm,
pretty much a lot of the bands we think of have the roots of punk. Like they were influenced by either the top three I would say are like Sex Pistols, Joy Division, or the Velvet Underground, which are all considered big punk bands that a lot of artists were influenced by in some way, shape, or form. So the thing is that I think the actual culture of punk isn't necessarily going to be dedicated to this one specific section that people seem to have in mind as a stereotype where it's like leather jacket, patches, mohawks. I mean, that's kind of like the mainstream perception of what punk is.
mm-hmm,
But it's really an umbrella term to describe a lot of different subgenres of music and a
mm,
lot of styles and a lot of different subcultures. I think the easiest example to say is either like maybe goth or like I'm blanking on the name. Excuse me. But crust punk is the other one, which what
mm-hmm.
was inspired by Jun Takahashi.
Right.
These are different subcultures of punk that took a life of their own, and there's a lot of different subcultures in punk that kind of have their own way of thinking. I mean, not all of them are going to be as crazy as dyed hair. Some of them are going to be a lot more subtle in the way that they're punk in a way.
Right.
So
So, I think a lot of people tend to look at. I think this is my issue with punk because as I grew, older and more acclimated to the world of fashion, so to speak, it was how often I was taking references from like punk influence, right? Like how often I was just like, I want to do something that is antithetical to what everybody else is doing, right? Like I appreciate that because like I'm the type of person who just literally is just like I don't care if somebody doesn't like it, right? Like I don't care if you don't like it, I like it. And I think that that's one of the ways that I've tried to at least portray this channel is like, listen, man, I don't care what you wear. Like, there's no idea of what is hot, what is not to me, right? Like, I think everything should be personal. And from what I gather about punk, when, people mention like it's like rebelliousness. But when you think about rebelliousness, is it rebelliousness against the status quo? Or is it being like, I'm going to do what I want to do? And I'm not gonna allow you to determine what I am going to do. Am I getting there, or how would you describe it?
it's really interesting because when you look at the culture itself, it's kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
There's like certain avenues where it's like, oh, we're going to rebel against the status quo, but we're all going to do it in the same way, and that's kind of when the culture gets a little bit stagnant, and then all of a sudden, some people in that culture start to say, we're going to do things the way we want to do, and then you get another kind of like root of the tree that kind of spreads is what I would say. And that keeps happening over time. And that's kind of how I would describe punk culture is that it gets to be like all of these people start to get a certain way and they're going to be like, we're going to rebel against the status quo. And then they all start doing it in the same way. And then it kind of gets stagnant. And then you have some people who decide to be outsiders in it. And then they decide to kind of create things in their own way and do it in their own way. And then you have a new route that's made and then it keeps on going. And that's kind of how I guess the best way I can describe punk culture.
Right.
Is that it's kind of that cycle of things happening.
So, if I were to ask you in the lens of fashion, right? Like
Yes.
we're looking at how punk is, how so many designers have used this punk subcultures and the subcultures that come from punk. These different roots, as you call it. Which designers do you think truly changed the dynamic of fashion through the lens of punk? Like which designers were really the ones who spearheaded this idea that this was an important thing to showcase, at least in a in a fashion format, in a designer format?
Definitely. I think number one would probably be Vivienne Westwood.
Mm-hmm.
It's really she kind of created the whole original aesthetic of punk that we all think about in the mainstream, and she keeps on creating today and kind of adding to that original aesthetic. I mean, she's the reason we have mohawks kind of in a way, and everything's kind of associated with her original store sex with Malcolm McLaren, where you have all of those very traditional punk ideologies. I guess the two that I would say in kind of the middle might be Alexander McQueen and Marc Jacobs. Alexander McQueen definitely brought the same or a similar aesthetic to Vivienne Westwood and just kind of forwarded it in a way and brought it more into the fashion world, especially. When you look at the work of McQueen, it's definitely, there's a lot of Vivienne in it.
Right.
It's a very much more fashiony way. And he really pushed that. And that's the reason I think we have a lot of what we have in fashion today. Like a lot of the kind of, maybe I would say, irreverent maximalism. Probably fashion is probably because of McQueen, or at least why it's accepted and so popular. And then Marc Jacobs really, I would say, just because of his grunge collection, really started making it acceptable to take from these subcultures, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Because
right.
before Marc Jacobs, I think people would take from subcultures, but it would only be for a season or two. You know what I mean? Make it into their whole thing.
Right.
Or these cultures. And Marc Jacobs really made it trendy or like a thing to take from him, and I think his whole grunge collection really kind of put like, I mean, his grunge collection is the reason we all wear ripped jeans today. That's that collection is a big deal, and it
Right.
takes directly from American punk and grunge specifically, which I would call a part of punk.
Right. Like it's one of those roots you were talking about earlier,
It's
right?
definitely those roots, yeah.
So
And
just
yeah,
to expand this question, with it being so, let's just say, mainstream now, like it's definitely a part of the discussion, right?
mhm,
And many have become incredibly artistic with it. You can even look at the work of lesser known individuals over here, like in Japan, like Kansai Yamamoto, who definitely wouldn't be considered like a definitive punk esque designer, but many people from that you know from that culture were like, yeah, this we can apply this. So to expand this question is, being that it's mainstreamed now and basically accepted, is it still a viable subculture to pull from aesthetically, or has it been exhausted?
that's a great question. When I saw this question that you sent it to me, I kind of go back and forth on it. I think for some, I think there might be enough roots. Like there
Mm-hmm.
might be enough countercultures, there might be enough weird people in it, and there might be enough interesting things in it for it to still be viable to some people. I mean, I think maybe one of the best examples of that is like maybe Yang Lee.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how familiar you are with his work, but he did a lot pulling from different parts of punk subculture that kind of only became uncovered and more popular once the internet existed and people could kind of go back and take a look at these weird bands. And there's still a lot of progression within the subculture, but if we're going to talk about maybe the traditional part of punk, like the Vivienne Westwood kind of style, or like the Sex Pistols,
Mm.
that kind of like Mohawk, I guess maybe we'll call it Mohawk punk or something like that. But like the
Right.
Vivienne Westwood style, where it's dyed hair, flashy graphics, leather. I don't really know. I don't think so. Like that very
Oh.
traditional kind of way of looking at punk. Jun Takahashi had a great take on it, like 30 years after it was invented.
Right.
After that, you really don't have a lot that's super interesting. You do still have people referencing it today. Like, I mean, if you want to look at like famous people like Machine Gun Kelly, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like it's
Mm-hmm.
still very much part of our culture. But is it worth referencing? I'm not really sure. I wouldn't
Mm.
decide yes. I mean, there are certain avenues and certain artists that you could go down that I think you're going to have a very interesting time with, possibly. But the very core kind of Vivienne Westwood dyed hair, like traditional way we look at punk, it is so mainstream right now, and it's only really referenced by the mainstream at this point.
Mm. I find that I find that so interesting because after spending this extended period in Japan, right? What most people, I have to kind of, I don't want to say educate, but I have to really tell them about is, as dynamic as fashion is in Japan, almost all of these subcultures stem from the influence of punk. Even hip hop, like even hip hop styles in Japan stem from this idea of punk. Not that it's like, oh, they're, how can they're taking hip hop style, how is that punk to them? Well, I have to tell them, like, this is a homogenous country where you're, the nail that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So anything that's antithetical to the general consensus of what everybody does is an anathema. Like you can't, it's like you shouldn't do it, right? But it has been, it has exploded. The punk subculture has exploded since the, I would say the 70s in Japan, like late 70s, early 80s. It just exploded. I mean, Vivienne Westwood was incredibly popular early in Japan's kind of like history of, involving into fashion. Of course, we know about vintage subcultures in Japan. So, that being said, when we extend this question of can you still pull from punk? I think in certain places it still is viable to pull from, but is it the culture itself? I think that's the main question, is like, are they just pulling from it, or is it just like, is it the culture? Because it seems like punk, a lot of these labels, luxury design or whatever you want to call it, they're inaccessible, right, to a great many of people. So what do you, in that regard, just how do you feel, is it still what it is today, given that, is it the culture or is it just the aesthetic? I guess in
I
so many
mean,
words.
oh, good lord. I mean, I have trouble with the definition of punk
Mm,
itself. It's like the
right.
definition
I do
for
too. Right. Right.
they're really, I would probably go as far to say punk and avant-garde maybe mean the same thing, really.
Mm,
But the original aesthetics of punk are probably so rooted in all of our culture. Like it really is the trendy thing, maybe, and really just kind of the against the edge thing. I mean, I'm especially in a Japanese context when you look at something like Comme des Garçons, which
mm-hmm.
is so rooted in punk, but really original. I love CDG because it's
Yeah.
it's extremely punk to me. But yeah, I would say it's maybe the norm, and we're kind of, if I were to look at it from probably like a historical side, we're probably entering a new era of kind of like what is pushing the edge, and it's probably not in this route of punk anymore.
What
It's
would you say
probably,
it is?
I think, what we're kind of at the edge right now. I would say with like Balenciaga or Moss with pushing the edge, which is this hyper satirical kind of thing.
Mm,
Is like very like self-parodying type of um, fashion, and I think from there, I think we will probably go into a more technical aspect of what is pushing the edge of fashion,
mm-hmm.
along more the like when things like acronym or maybe like a brand called Hamkiss start expanding more, where it's more not necessarily avant-garde in a beaten, weathered, or even in this like kind of way of like punk where it's like it's directly referencing this original punk. It's going to be kind of, I think what kind of goes to more of a pushing the edge thing is going to be more futuristic is probably
Right.
it.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Because I see that it's like I have these conversations with people who are involved in quote unquote techwear, right? Like how tech are like utilitarian and whatever fashion. I have to explain, it's like, that's kind of rooted in this lifestyle that you're pulling from, right? I mean, there's a reason why the term cyberpunk exists, right? Because it
Oh, of
is
course.
right. Like there's a reason
Maybe
why.
that's the point. Maybe that is. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong then.
But then no, that's exactly the point. It's like when we look at like something like this futurist look, like when we look at a futurist look, it's highly utilitarian in its most exaggerated form, right? You see more and more people adopting maybe cargos or utility vests. I see that I mean, you could just one look at Instagram and you could see this happening at at a rapid pace. But also there is this sense, I think, and this goes into the next question that I have for you, um, into this sense of individuality is becoming there's like this underlying groundswell of individuality in fashion that we're seeing. It's not necessarily on full display, but it's there, and I think it's due to hype, mainstream, or whatever. So to expand on this, how does it inform? Like, how does punk and how does punk equate into that? And then on top of that, how does it inform you personally, your fashion choices when you go about getting involved in a designer, into a style, whatever, what have you?
Yeah. So I think punk. I mean, at the end of the day, if I were to probably, I probably thought about this way too much to be like real that like some person would think about this, but like the definition of punk, I can't really nail down.
Mm,
Maybe the older I get and the more I try to, because there's so many different little roots to it and subcultures and different meanings to different people. maybe the way I would equate it is avant-garde, which is against the edge. And I think when you are truly being punk, maybe in a way, the best way to describe that is to be yourself and truly yourself. So I think to be punk in like this age of the internet is to be in a sense individual or who you
Mm,
really are and not really amassing to what others think,
mm,
which is difficult, especially with the internet and the whole concept of algorithms, especially
right.
all based on grouping people who are similar and making sure that they are always with each other, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say the best thing to do is try to be punk is to be yourself in a way and
Mm.
really who you are and feel free to express yourself in those ways. In a similar way to that avant-garde is to be against the edge and truly to be yourself.
And and
Um,
and again, how would you describe what you do? Like, because I've seen your outfits. Like,
yeah.
I
Oh my.
enjoy them.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I
I
enjoy them. I'm like, oh, that's I like that.
I, I
Right.
I appreciate that. I don't know. I just kind of I've had trouble nailing down my own aesthetic, which
Mm,
might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. I've been a huge enjoyer of Comme des Garçons for
mm,
years, and probably in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been able to really consume it a lot.
mm,
A little bit less so recently. I don't know. I'm really happy with whatever I get to pick out. For a long time, I was really big into Rick Owens, Comme des Garçons. I loved Raf Simons. Was never really able to afford it. Still, am
mm.
not able to because it's extremely expensive.
Right.
Uh,
It's up
but
there.
it's up there, especially the stuff I love, which is like the early stuff, and it's like,
Mm.
hey, do you want to take out your next 4 paychecks on us?
No.
So, but yeah, I love Comb because I think it really speaks to a certain type of, maybe I would say, masculinity that isn't so based in I guess it's more based in the mind versus the maybe more based in the mind versus than pure aesthetic. I think
Mm,
that's what I'm attracted to is maybe less. I think I'm attracted to brands with aesthetics that aren't necessarily based in the mindset of masculinity from the 1960s on in the United
mm,
States. Because I personally think there's a certain mindset that kind of goes along with masculinity from like 1950s, right after World War II on, that isn't consistent with masculinity throughout the rest of culture.
right.
Throughout
Right. That's a
history.
great point.
I think, when you look at masculinity through the rest of history, what it means to kind of dwell into that is a lot of different things. But when you kind of go, especially in America, from like the 1950s to 1960s on, it's very much like don't ever have emotions and kind of like love football, something like that. And so brands that kind of challenge that, I enjoy personally.
Mm. You
Okay.
know, we actually gonna have a conversation. I love that you mentioned this because we're actually gonna have a conversation, a video that's coming out a little bit later, when we talk about the how politics has unfortunately weaved its way into the fashion world, and
Oh yeah.
how it's almost completely it's I wouldn't say ruined it, but it's hurt it in a lot of ways because the idea of how you're supposed to look or how you're supposed to even design today or how you're supposed to approach it when there's an agenda involved in the making process. How do you feel about these brands? Because I just want to add, I want to pick your brain on this. How do you feel about these labels that are that are that are attempting to be inclusive or attempting to go against the grain, but end off coming out as like they have an agenda involved. There's an agenda attached to this um attached to this brand.
I think when it comes to me, like if there's a true agenda that's not necessarily from the heart or the soul, that becomes very obvious. Like when
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, we want to like push people in a certain direction, and it's not from like a genuine like, oh, I believe this. Like
Right.
you know what I mean? Not even like it's like part of your essence that you believe it, not necessarily like I believe this when I vote on a ballot. And I guess to me it's whatever, but it becomes very obvious, those brands. I think the easiest example is like maybe the Dior "we should all be feminists"
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
It's
exactly
like,
my point.
where it's like, why?
Hmm.
You have an agenda, but you're not also, it doesn't come from the soul.
Right.
It doesn't come from the heart, or whatever you want to call it.
I,
It's
no.
not very interesting to me.
Okay.
That's the best way to say it. It doesn't interest me. It's easy to see, and I don't really want to be a part of it in any way. But that's what I would say. I think that's very, anything that was ingenuine. I think I'm not very interested in.
Okay. Um, and that's like really my position. Like whenever I'm very critical of me personally of Celebrity Showcase because I always think it's a show, it's a game to them. Like I have no. I actually had this conversation with one of my good friends, and I said, I don't care what a celebrity wears or whatever they choose to wear. That's not of any consequence to me. Do what you want, wear what you want, wear it well, whatever. But what I do have a problem with is many of them saying, "Hey, I'm doing this and I'm standing against this kind of idea," but it's not like they're wearing that every day. Like it's like this when somebody says, "Oh, he can't wear this." Or let's use a recent example. Kid Cudi can't wear this wedding dress. You got a problem with that, Reggie? It's like, what's up with this toxic masculinity? And I'm like, no, it's not that. It's is he wearing that or something like that on a day-to-day basis? And is he really doing that? And why is he giving me the middle finger? Like, is it a middle finger to society? Is it saying like, are you trying to show me that, oh, I'm taking it thus far and therefore you are? And it really goes into your point. That's how I feel about it. It doesn't feel genuine to me. It feels really fake and constructed. How would you say?
Yeah, you can really tell when it's genuine or not, especially from like a celebrity or someone consuming a product.
Right.
That's the key, is how someone consumes a product. I mean, I had this conversation recently. I'm going to try to tread somewhat carefully.
Yeah.
But for example,
Try.
the idea of like men wearing skirts or something adjacent to it, like dresses, you can tell right by the outfit when somebody really wants to play with a certain silhouette.
Mm.
Somebody wants to make a statement, you know? It's very obvious
That
by the way they
I
style it. It's really, I think, a good example of that, or even just like somewhat of like maybe a more feminine silhouette. I think a
mm.
good example of that, personally for me, is like look at how Playboy Cardi styles his kinds of outfits versus how Harry Styles would style his type of outfit.
Right. Right.
I would say.
Right. That's very careful. And I like that explanation. That's exactly my point. Like so most people know about me personally, like I'm a big fan of like I also love Comme des Garçons. Like I'm always going to be a big fan. I fell in love with Rei Kawakubo as soon as I figured out that she was basically the person who put Junya Watanabe on. All right, I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my lady. And of course, but what I gravitate towards silhouette wise has always been the more tailored Yoji Yamamoto approach. And for me, I was always scared to showcase that, like because of the culture that I come from, right? And so for me, it was always like, do I show these layered pants that literally look like a skirt? But right? Like they
Yeah,
literally
it's like
look,
a kill. It's like it's okay.
right? And then after a while, for it was like, you know what? I don't care. Like I like them, and that's all that matters. So when you talk about silhouette, it's almost like a science of fashion, and that's why I appreciate how you broke down when you were breaking down Jun, breaking down even Takahide Miyashita and these kind of individuals. It was like a science to this. It was not simply, hey, these guys like this. It was literally a science of breaking down fashion. Like when we look at the Scab collection, Jun Takahashi's, I believe, his first runway in Paris. When we look at this, and you see the references that he's taking, and then you see the process, it's almost like you have to stand up and give this man an ovation, right?
No,
Like,
for
right?
sure, because it's like it's taking this crazy idea of like these people who were along the West Coast who were so interested in like living this punk lifestyle that they like created their kind of own weird process of sewing he just took it to like the next level and
Mm-hmm.
brought silhouettes to it. He put it to everything he could in fashion. He like almost took this math formula and put it against every single number that he could when it comes to fashion. And that's so awesome because
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're supposed to do as a designer is you see something like it's almost like a new math formula, I guess is the
Right.
way I and he just did that. It's really awesome.
I've always contended that with me, I love June. Like I love his work, but there's always a love hate relationship with his collections, right? Like I'm like,
Oh,
dude, sometimes when you go in, but there's other times when like you're just feeling inspired by something else, or
yeah.
maybe you're phoning it in, right? Like the difference between Fallen Man and uh what is it, generate, I forgot which one it was. I think it was 2016 spring summer. Like the difference between that or the Clockwork Orange jump or the Nosferatu jump off, like the difference between Fallen Man and those are like the Atlantic apart. And like I could see where the references are, but I can also be like, yeah, man, this is just, I know what you're capable of.
Yeah. With June particularly, it's really obvious when he decides for a season he's gonna take a year off. Or maybe I don't know what he's doing on those vacations. I love June. I
Right?
love June so much. My first like Grail piece that I bought is a undercover jacket, but
Mm-hmm.
it's yeah, I don't really know. It's kind of almost the same thing with the soloist too,
Right.
because they
Right.
both like have these collections where you're like, wow, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You spent so much time on this. There's so much love, care, respect put into it. And then like with undercover especially, you're like, wow, you're like doing some really regularly like proportioned chinos with a sweater, maybe a graphic on the
Thanks,
sweater.
June. Right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I
it's
really
like
am.
it almost looks like J. Crew with like a weird graphic stuff on it.
Right? It's like, so you gave me a hat with bat ears on it. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
exactly.
thanks, June. I really appreciate that. And I think that's the thing about him. It's that I can't always be, when somebody asks me, who's the best Japanese designer that you know, I'm like, it's very hard for me to answer that question because I'm like, I would naturally gravitate towards Ide or Yoji, right? Like, but if I'm taking those, outside of them, then, obviously it'd be like, well, what about June? And I'm like, yeah, he's great, man. He's amazing.
It's
But the
great.
time whenever he takes that time off, it's just like,
Whoa.
and it's like, I was waiting for you, right? Like I was waiting for you, man. Like I was waiting for this collection,
No,
and
for
it's
real.
underwhelming. Um,
You
but that gets into my next question for you. Um, Maybe this is applying to June, and maybe this applies to other designers. Is this mainstream appeal hurting fashion design? Like, is it hurting the fact, because we've seen it with so many collections. I mean, what I call the streetwear era of fashion, which we're almost getting out of. Like we're basically at the end of the beginning with this hyper influence of street interjected into fashion. Do you believe that mainstream appeal has kind of hurt fashion design because of just sales, hype, and whatever, what have you, or whatever you come up with?
I think for me to answer yes would be like a very hipster thing, like, oh, I was on it first, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And like,
I painted you into a corner right there, but
yeah, exactly. Real. You could say it is, but that's kind of like the way of the dodo.
right.
Whatever becomes interesting, whatever is avant-garde, whatever is punk, whatever is trendy, whatever is interesting is always going to become mainstream and then kind of fade out. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter what it is. Things constantly evolve. That's how the world is. Is it hurting it? Maybe the people who originated it and benefited off of it for an extreme lot for a certain time and then kind of go slowly down. But I don't know if I would say hurting is the right. is the right word. It just is evolution. That's the
Right. So,
world.
and that's something that a friend of mine, Landy, says all the time. He's like, it's not that, it's things have changed, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just not the same. But what I'm really kind of interested in knowing is, because there is this dynamic between, the two different, or I would say like few different subgroups of fashion enthusiasts, right? There's the purist, technical, far be it from me to say, like, people like yourself, like, who know a lot about fashion, right? Like, I know these collections, I know these designers, right? And then there's individuals who are enthusiasts, but not necessarily, they don't really care, like, does it look good, who's wearing it? And far be it for me to say, I don't actually think that those people are, wrong in assuming that. Yeah, if you want to wear something that makes you look good and makes you feel confident about yourself, go right ahead. Do you need to know the history? I don't think you need to know. But I do feel that knowing that history makes it even more compelling to wear for yourself, right?
It adds something to your life that is
Right.
valuable. It may change you as a person and change the way you look at life. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you choose labels, when Karsten chooses a label or brand to identify with, what is the process like for you, right? What is that dynamic? What is that process? How can somebody learn? Like, you're not telling them, hey, you should do this, but this is what you can learn from what I do, like, if you're receptive to it.
Yeah, I think I kind of start my basis away from fashion itself then, probably. I look at what do I believe, what is the core of me? What are the books I read? What is the kind of ideas from that? What are the things that compel me? I mean, I suppose one of the things that like there are reasons I relate to Rick Owens, for example,
Mm-hmm.
because he presents himself as a humble person. He has similar influences to me. He also is interested in punk, kind of that more gothic extension of punk. He's interested in shapes such as just like brutalist architecture, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of way of designing, and that speaks to me in a way. So I choose to kind of choose why I'm interested in that brand because of that. Sometimes it's just because of it's. I think it has to relate to the core of who you are.
Mm.
I think there's nothing wrong with picking out a brand and saying, I think that looks cool, or I wore that because I like the person who wore that before me. Like,
Right.
I saw Travis Scott wear that and I thought that was cool or dope or whatever, and I picked that out and bought the same thing as him. That's cool too. If that empowers you and makes you feel like you're going to go through your day as a better person, what I do is I try to take things that kind of go to my core a little bit deeper than, oh, I saw somebody who I look up to wearing this. I find people who have a similar mentality to me, or it's in the essence of the design itself where it's a similar concept. Recently, I've gotten more into climbing mountains and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So into and Wander has been a brand that I've been interested in.
Yeah.
REI, like backpack, and I'm like, none of these designs really speak to me. And then I was like, and Wander, it's designed by originally a guy who worked for Issy, but it's for backpacking. And I was like, this is awesome. It's practical stuff that speak to you and who you are as a person. So I think it's easier if you know who you are to pick out clothing and find designers that speak to you and your own, shall we say, ethics, moral, the things you like to do, whatever, so and so. So that's what I would say, I guess.
And going further into that, because
Yeah.
I think when we explore, our conversation was like punk, how the punk influence in fashion. When we look at Vivian Westwood, and again, I think one of the biggest thing, um, uh, that we tend to do is it's the music, right? Like, the music is the biggest thing. I tend to look at, it's like saying hip hop lifestyle, right? Or we look at the music first, right? And so these movements may have started to gain mass appeal because of music, but I think that they had already festered as just in general, like, how do you feel? Like, do you believe it wasn't? I don't believe that the music was the catalyst. I believe that it was already just baked in. This is how people lived. This is what people did, and the music spawned from that, because culture is before before the actual action of entertainment, right? Like, you don't, nobody comes out of the womb, this is hip hop, this is what we're gonna do, right? Like, this is how we dress, this is how we, there's a general consensus of how people will present themselves. And so that's why I asked you that question. How do you choose labels, brands that you identify with? Because if it's based in something that is personal to you, then uh, then it goes beyond just what you're influenced by, as far as who's wearing it, what's wearing it, and who's wearing it, who wore it, or who made it, right? So does that play a factor? Like, for you've mentioned quite a bit of names like Raf Simons. Like is that one of? Does who makes it important to you as well?
I mean, for me, what it in certain cases,
Mm,
not all of them, because for example, Raf Simons, he might make something that I like, he might make something that I very heavily dislike. When it comes to someone like Ray Kubo, who's just so truly themselves in almost everything they do, I there's not a lot of times where I look at something by Ray Kubo and be like, I dislike that. There
mm-hmm.
might be times where I say, that's not for me, but um, when it comes to someone like Ray specifically, I'm very attracted to whatever she does. It's just seems to always be compelling in some way, shape, or form.
Mm,
Maybe Ray is the only person I would say who is like that. But when it comes to other designers, it just really depends on, does the specific season, item, etc. speak to me.
mm,
I like Rick Owens in many circumstances, not all the time, but I like what he stands for as an individual and how he
mm.
brings that into his design.
Right. It's kind of like how I feel about when people ask me about like Chitose Abe. Like, I always say, they're like, do you have any Sakai pieces? I'm like, honestly, I don't. I just love her approach. I love the fact that she was very candid when, something that somebody I caught wind of, how somebody had said like YouTube designers only make their grails, right? And then right, whenever they start a brand, they only
Okay,
make their grail, right? Like they just make whatever it is that they can't get anymore. And then and I had to tell somebody, it was like, listen, as much as you know about fashion, there's a designer by the name of Chitose Abe of Sakai, and she literally said she makes stuff that she would wear. Right, like she literally said that this in an interview. She was like, "I make stuff that I wanted to wear, that I wear." Right, and so this idea of where your inspirations come from is a very fluid idea amongst many designers. Some designers are, like you said, like Rick. It comes from a different place. Maybe it's not stuff he would ultimately wear, but maybe it's stuff that he's just like, this is how I see the design process, right?
Oh yeah.
So with that being said, what do you believe? My last question to you, uh, just for this round, um, what do you think is the biggest misconception about people who enjoy this scene called fashion, this industry, who love the it's just a general question that I usually ask everyone. What's the biggest misconception? Some people who are like, man, these people who like fashion, they're just it's blah blah, yada 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 yada, right? It's not real. It's, why do people get into it? Yada yada yada, all that. What is the biggest misconception about those individuals?
Sometimes maybe humility can exist. I think
Mm,
humility is something that I appreciate the most about a person, and I can find that that can exist even if you're maybe you exonerate yourself and wear interesting clothes. You can still be a humble person.
right,
With that, maybe anti-pretentiousness, any other word you want to put to, there can be grounding.
right,
Even you can be a grounded person who
right.
is humble. I think that's just a very good attribute for anyone to have: humble, humility, and kindness.
Yeah, man, I say it. I I
And
I
it's
totally
very
agree. Go ahead.
it's it's so against this mainstream appeal of, like, I remember growing up and saying, "Oh, I'm kind of interested in fashion," and people were like, "What, do you want to be a part of the cast of The Devil Wears Prada?" And like yell at people all day and be like, "I don't like your clothes," or sometimes I do that, but on a day-to-day basis. Just be kind to people, humble and loving. I think that can exist a lot, and I think there's a lot of people I've met in this industry.
It's
Yeah.
so funny because you're right. When you meet people, especially designers, right? Like some of the up and coming designers and just people who are highly involved in, they're actually quite pleasant people. Like they're not going crazy on you. It's like, oh yeah, this is what happened, man. Like they're really open to actually letting you know. And I think I honestly, I got into fashion because I always thought it was a great way to express yourself without saying anything, right?
Mm,
Like without having to open your mouth, right?
yeah.
After again, I've been living in this country of Japan for nearly almost 10 years now. It's insane. Almost 10 years. I almost got 10 years on, man. Like almost. I'm almost there. And I frequently still get the, well, you can't understand what it's like because you're not, you're not Japanese, Reggie. Like you there's nothing that you can say. You're not, so you don't get it. And no matter how much you study, your Asian studies major with a focus in Japanese language and history, you don't get it. Right? Right? You've been living there for 10 years. I don't care. And one of the things that I have to like let people know is that I'm not trying like I'm not trying to be Japanese, right? Like I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to be the expert in Japanese fashion, right? Like I just want to showcase what I know and what I've observed. And I think that's
Mm,
exactly what, the subcultures, whether that be punk, hip hop, or whatever, grunge, all the roots, I believe that that's really the point is to learn about people, right?
mm,
Like that's what I feel that fashion is. It's learning about people, and the inspirations that we take from people can be manifested into something as expressive as clothing. But it doesn't need to be that. So that's my final thought on this part. But can you expand on anything that I said right there?
no, I mean, I would definitely agree. You could take that to all of art. Art
Right.
is supposed to be the expression of the human condition. Speaks truth to what a human is and our experience, so you can gain empathy and understanding to others. That's what the best art is. It's just gaining an understanding to others in this world around us. I mean,
This is why I like it, man. I'm with you 100%. This is why I followed it. I thought it was just for somebody to take the time to build out a wardrobe, an outfit, to showcase what they're about. I just think that it's an amazing thing. I think it's so interesting to me. Like you can find out so much about a person just by how much how worn their shoes are, right? Like
oh
and we
yeah,
know this, right? Like that's why Balenciaga made those those shoes. Like because there's so much that you could tell about a person just by that. But that being said, as you guys know, if you guys have followed us before, we always like to give the guest an opportunity to take over the interview process, to switch roles. So this is Carson's Corner,
okay.
right?
I
So
guess
during this moment, I just want to let everybody know what it is. Uh, Basically, during this moment, what we do is, the guest basically can ask me any question or anything, and then I will either answer it or they can present something on their own. So that's what it is. Let it happen, Carson. Let everybody
oh,
know.
I guess my first question for you. You're someone who spends a lot of time in Japan, which I just find fascinating. I I love Ray. I love Yoji. And my biggest question for you is like, what is the from your perspective as an American? You're an American coming to Japan, of
Mm-hmm.
course. The difference in the Japanese like perception of beauty, I guess, is something that's always fascinated me. Because from what I understand from my reading, which may or may not be correct because it's always reading, but the Japanese perspective of beauty comes a lot from this idea of like mystery or ambiguity.
Oh,
Would you say that's correct? I'm just
okay.
curious.
Yeah. See, now you're getting into my my history
Yeah.
knowledge, right? So if we take a look at something as simple as something that maybe many Westerners know, the idea of geisha, right? Uh, And what most people may not know about geisha is that there were subtle cues that they would do to inform someone that they were interested or that they were trying to get somebody attracted to them, right? There was these little subtle things. It wasn't really an overt display of let's say sexuality, or like let people know like, yo, I'm on your leg, let it be known. But there was these subtle cues, right? And so when you relate that to modern Japan, it still actually applies. There's this modesty, but there's also this idea of who makes the first move. In fact, from what I know and from what I've experienced with Japanese, just being around Japanese people, men are quite reluctant to approach women in an aggressive way. And women are actually not used to men addressing them in an aggressive way. So when it happens, it becomes a very, I would say, uncomfortable situation, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about the idea of beauty from the Japanese perspective, I would say you're basically on point there, because there's far more. I mean, even just in the way that they normally, like the dress that you would see, like you're talking about things that take on Japanese traditional silhouettes across even fast fashion labels like Uniqlo. Uniqlo out in Japan is miles different than what you might see in the States. It's less revealing. It's more, you have wider silhouettes. You have more draped silhouettes. It's almost like the layers need to be pulled off, and how you present yourself, because there's this thing in Japan, it's like how you present yourself is, present yourself well, that's akin to being polite. Like, just even no matter what you do, go all the way. So I completely understand. Don't look like it's like, how you present yourself is so important. And because it can tell everything about you, right? Which is why when you go at, businesses in Japan, everybody wears like a standard outfit. Like there's like one outfit for the salary man in Japan. It's like navy suit, white shirt, blue tie, and the women have replicated that. So there's this idea that there is, don't ruffle any feathers. And when it's time to, when the courting process starts, it's more subtle. It's less bombastic. It's less aggressive, so to speak. So yeah, the idea of beauty is absolutely more, I would say, even just because beauty goes into attraction, goes into relationship, right? So it really goes into this idea of how people actually communicate with each other. Opinions are, you don't necessarily go out of your way to make uncomfortable situations unless that's your character. But, you've seen successful people out here do it, so who just more aggressive. But yeah, I would say that you're basically, you're right.
Okay.
From what
And that applies to art as well. Like ambiguity in art is extremely important from a Japanese context.
Oh yeah, no. So yeah, you're right. I frequently tell people like why individuals like Jinya Watanabe, even Jun Takahashi, who's actually more talkative than most people when it comes to explaining his collections, but Yoji Yamamoto is notoriously known for never explaining his collections.
No clue what's going on.
It's like, where did he pull this from? So if you guys really want to, if you guys are watching this and you really want a funny, just expose on Yoji Yamamoto, go to a recent collection and read the Vogue review of that collection. They absolutely don't know what to say. They're just like,
they're looking at it and they're like, it's really avant-garde, and you're like, what does that mean? I know it's avant-garde, but like, tell me a little bit.
Tell me a little bit about it, because he doesn't really have any show notes. He doesn't explain his collections. It is, and this is, you're absolutely right. The idea of ambiguity, whatever it is that you take it as, is the point, right? Like, I shouldn't have to interpret this for you because I want you to interpret it for yourself. And You say what?
And that's like the beauty in it is that you get
Yes.
to interpret it for yourself in your own kind of
Right.
process of life. Yeah.
It's the biggest difference between Japanese designers and Western designers. Because Western designers, there's this big apparatus. It's like, here are the show notes. This is what we're doing. This is what we were influenced by. Here are the key points. I mean, if you look at somebody like Virgil Abloh, who had literal books of his, like, here's the book of this collection. And you're like, okay, I got to read this whole thing, right? So obviously in the West, like we need further explanation. And if you really want another laugh, watch an interview with Yoji Yamamoto. Like watch a Western person giving an interview to Yoji Yamamoto. It's always like completely surface level. He's like, yeah, I just wanted to make clothes for women.
For
Like,
women.
and
I'm
it's
right in the
like
book. I know it. Yeah.
it's like I don't know why aren't you giving me more? And so that desire to have more is something that I would say that the Japanese in particular are just are not keen to do because it's almost saying I want you to think this way about it. And that isn't necessarily how they approach the design process. It's more so I want you to interpret it and I'll react to it. Like Jun is actually known for doing this. He listens to what the critics say about his collections and then he'll adapt his next collection to what how they interpreted the last collection. Right? So he's like, yeah, I listen to it and then I adapt, right? So it's still what I do, but it's also I'm listening. I would rather listen to your reaction rather than me tell you what the reaction should be. Because it puts me in this position where it's like if I didn't accomplish this thing that you expected of me, then it all falls apart.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest reason why Japanese designers are very, you know, I would say it's the more technical reason why Japanese designers are like that. But the more just overarching reason is just culture. It's just the culture. It's just how they are. They're just very reserved people. They don't say much.
Examples of that is when Ray was giving an interview. They're like, "What are your inspirations to make clothes?" To Ray Kawakubo, and she just said, "I just make clothes because this is what I do."
Exactly.
And everybody was like, "Okay," and
What?
they're like, "What does it mean?" And she's just like, she just doesn't care. She just
And
makes
her
clothes.
and her husband is sitting there like you're the only one who thinks like that. Like nobody
Exactly.
thinks like this.
Oh,
Right, I remember reading that interview. Like I'm like, that's
I'm like,
classic.
He's very the guy who's married to Ray Kawakubo, who started
Adrian Joff. Adrian Joff, the
Adrian
South
Joff,
African,
yes,
yeah. He
and
he he's constantly trying to whenever she does interviews and he's, you know, has to, you know, translate for her, he's sitting there, he's like, yeah, but you're the only one who thinks like that. This is
yeah.
it's not how fashion is.
Can you
Right?
like
She's
say
like,
this
"Huh?"
in a different way? We need to sell more clothes. To, like,
Right, because that's really what's on his mind is like, yo, we need to sell clothes here, like please give
we're running
somebody
over street market. We gotta,
right. Hit him with something. People have been wanting to hear you for years, right? And you just hit them with I just make clothes. Right? The fact
exactly.
the other thing I think she said, you know, we're paraphrasing here, which she said she's not like excited about doing fashion. It's more like yeah, like I'm not like it's just that it's what I do, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's not.
it's doesn't make me happy. It's what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like she literally I think is in so many words she was like if it makes you happy then you can't be serious about it. She has a very strong like opinion
Yeah.
about her
Oh,
work,
I
right?
know. There's like no joy in it. It
Yeah,
feels
I'm
like
like
looking at it from a Western perspective. There probably is, but
right.
like it's like I am not happy when I do this. I
Right.
mean maybe I think a lot of the people who go out of the Bunker Institute would probably say the same thing from me.
Mm.
But
Yeah. Like, yeah, dude,
kind of
I've been sewing this is just what I do. All right.
crazy.
What else am
Yeah.
I gonna do?
I
Yeah,
remember
absolutely.
when I was very young, I was like, "Oh, that'd be cool to go there." No way I could ever get in
Oh
first time.
man, I
I'd be
just going on the campus is intimidating, right? I've been there several times. Yeah, and I mean, these people, you want to talk about the most these aren't the same individuals that you would see in Harajuku who are wearing like, the most bombastic outfits that you could ever think of, right? Like, and those people are actually, some of them, you hit like, and we're going to be showing you guys this stuff, so you'll see it very soon. When you hit like Harajuku, then you go to Omotesando, then you go to Minami Aoyama, and then later on you get to something like Daikan Yama, where the culture is a little bit different. Then you go to something that's super far like Osaka, and then you go to Kobe, then you go to, and then after that you go even more west, I should say, and you get to like Nagoya, and you see how like different people wear things. But then if we just take it in the context of like Harajuku is nothing compared to individuals who go to bunka. Like, it's nothing. Like, it is nothing, right? These individuals, they not just they know fashion, they know how to wear it, they know how to put it together. Some of these individuals should be having collections already, but all of the students are that good, right? It's super intense. And and there's one thing that makes a bunka student probably in one area, I don't think that they're, when we talk about like Central St. Martin's, like that's probably one of the best fashion schools to go to in the world, right? Like bar none. But there's one thing that I think bunka students have an edge over on almost every fashion school that you could possibly go to. The students, when they come out of that school, have such a supreme knowledge of fabric, it's out of control. They know about every single weave, every single dye, every single option, the development of textiles. And the reason for that is because when you go to bunka, they're actually they go in the traditional sense of Japanese design, which is it's always fabric first, always textile first. Everything. So when you start designing, it's like you going through the just like the run, not even the run of the mill, design process. This is how you sew a zigzag stitch, or this is how you put this together. It's all fabric first. And you know that when you start looking at collections like June, and you're saying, how did he come up with that? Fabrics. Junya Watanabe, fabric first. Even Yoji Yamamoto, fabric first. Like everything just works with fabric. Like it's always textile first. And when you get to that point, it becomes like just your tool. Like it becomes this secret weapon that Japanese designers have. And if you look at Japanese design from a bird's eye view, or just, objectively, you can see it happening across a multitude of designers. And once you realize it, you're like, I see what they did here. All right.
I mean, that's like the crazy thing. I mean, I've handled a lot of garments in my life. Mm-hmm. Like I've collected a little bit of Rick, a little bit of Raph, and people from the Antwerp Six, a little bit of Anne de Millimeter. Mm-hmm. When you start like buying in hand like things from CDG or Yoji or Issey, the things you start noticing is like, wow, they really work with interesting fabrics.
Right.
Because it's like, I think I remember I saw a friend's collection of a bunch of Raph garments at one point, and they're all the same. Mm-hmm. It's all the same kind of basic cottons, the same things you find anywhere else. They're nice, they're high quality. Mm-hmm. But when you like start looking into Ray's work, you find really interesting stuff.
Right, just the types of things that she's able to use is. How did you do it? I don't know, but you did it, and it's amazing. So that's probably what drew me to Japanese fashion in the first place. Is just I was just enamored with how they used textile, right? Like how it was used and how different it was. Also, silhouette played a major part. A lot of the silhouettes in Japanese fashion or just Japanese design methodology aren't often used in the Western design, but Japanese take Western design elements all the time and apply them to Japanese silhouettes, which is quite common. So yeah.
Interesting. I've talked to a lot of different people who are interested in fashion or who are like fashion historians, mm-hmm. whatever you call them. I don't know what to label these people at this point in time, but people who are more influenced by the Japanese perspective seem to be really keen on having the garment in hand. While while people who are like, for example, more interested in the Queen or something like that, they'll be like, "Oh, it's great to see it, but you can watch the collection, just look at it, you know." And
Mm-hmm.
then there's just a difference in like holding it and like feeling it and seeing how it interacts with your body versus, oh, I can look at it on video, it flows like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly I would say spot on, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, it's always been that. Like and even before I got heavy into Japanese fashion, I've always been like a very tactile person. Like I always wanted to feel something to just cuz for me it's always like how does would this feel on my skin? Like cuz I can't like if it doesn't feel good, like I'm going to feel even if it looks good, I'm not gonna want to wear it if it doesn't feel right. So,
Yeah.
one of the things it's so I'll give it to you this, and this is a just a final nail of what I'll say about this particular topic. So there's a website in Japan called Zozo.jp, I think. It's a basically the biggest online fashion retailer in Japan, and they have one of the best search engines period for finding the exact garment that you want. You can search for a garment based on the the hem line, the inseam, the outseam, the waistline, and the fabric, the color, and extreme measurements. Like it's crazy, right? Everything. One of the best things that they have, though, you can literally you can really find a shirt based on its neckline, like the type of neck line that they have. So if you want a U neck, V neck, a crew neck, a turtleneck, you can find it. And it's been such a boon to me for finding different labels because like I'm so specific about certain fabrics. So like I'll be like I'm looking for a half pant made with linen that are these measurements with this waistline. Like and for it's what's crazy about it is that they'll find it. Like
Yeah.
it's there and you're like that's what I was looking for. And it's so intuitive. It really makes you that's why I've kind of like preached about if you know about your pieces and you know about what you're actually looking for, the discovery process, then the whole brand thing gets thrown out the window. Like, what brand is that? It's like I'm not looking for the brand. I'm looking for this piece, right? Like I
Mhm.
need this. So it just becomes a more uh I would say for me it's a very enjoyable process, even though I could do it for like the search can take hours.
Mhm.
Right? So
I mean, I've done the same thing on Grilled, except I've looked up nylon cargos. The brand I ended up with was Matrix Cosplay.
oh, nice.
I was like, nylon cargos. I got these in hand, and I was like, why do they say the Matrix on this? Turns
Well,
out
I
they're
mean, I
Matrix
guess I'll take
cosplay.
them.
All right,
Oh, whatever. So yeah,
whatever.
like
They fit nice, you know.
if it's that's what I want. So yeah, that's basically um that's basically how, you know, I think we meandered off of the original question, but I think that's basically how I look at fashion.
No, that's very cool. Okay. From a more artistic perspective, I suppose, would you consider avant-garde today, and where do you think it's gonna go?
Oh, wow.
I know I'm hitting you hard
You put
right
me
there,
on the
but
spot like nobody has
no.
ever done. I've never actually had. Wow, that's a good question. Um, Jeez. To be completely honest with you, I think the you can look at designers like Iris and be like, is that wearable? Is that really exploring the contour? Is it really exploring a different way to wear things, or is it an experimental way to design, right?
Mhm.
Like what are we actually looking at right here? We can even take it back to what we say the early avant-garde movement in the Reis of the world, the Yojis of the world. You can even put Anne in that discussion, or Tatsuro Horikawa of Julius. To be completely honest with you, I think when we talk about the avant-garde now, because most of the I don't know if most of it's been explored, but I'm being real with you. I think it's hard to have a true avant-garde movement today. It's so much harder because what is acceptable is has expanded to such great lengths that we're entering into an age where I think wrongly, I'm gonna put my opinion on this. I think wrongly that they're equating, most are equating almost androgynous androgyny as the new avant-garde, right? Mm-hmm. Like, but it's coming to a point where it's like things that you wouldn't normally wear, like things that you wouldn't normally wear for your body type. And I think that that movement is happening within like men's fashion movement. What's acceptable to wear, right? And taking that angle when it comes to a new position on artistic expression. But I honestly don't think that. I think it's very hard to have I'm gonna be real with you. I can't give you a definitive answer because I don't think that it's actually possible at this point because of how, and the reason why I don't think that it's possible is because of the moment that we're in society. We're in a society where social media has taken over the entire landscape, which means anything that could be new, could be viewed as purposeful, as different, can be adopted by a person of note, and it completely becomes it exits the avant-garde space because now it's acceptable. Now it's like we've explored that, and now even the most, I would say, even the most daring or even the most challenging things, challenging artistic designs could be accepted by a small minority, like that could say, oh yeah, that's plausible. And that's where I think the avant-garde loses its edge the minute that it becomes the norm. And all it takes is somebody who says, I'll try it, of note, of import, until it's acceptable. So I think it takes a big hit. But give me an example of a label that you would consider today to be in that, and maybe I can react to that.
I don't think there is one at the moment. Yeah. I think in 2014 or 2015, Vetements and Balenciaga was like ultra like ironic avant-garde, almost bordering into like the David Foster Wallace sort of kind of, where it's like ultra ironic. And before that, it's like Ray did everything.
Right.
So my question is for you is like, where does it go from here? I don't really know.
I can't tell you. I mean, you look at somebody like, and you're absolutely right. The last vestige of the avant-garde is with Ray. Like I truly believe that. I just don't see. I do see like certain designers exploring different things, right? What's his name? Jeez. I think it's Tomika Nantoka. I forgot his name. I forgot his name. But I was researching him the other day, and I saw some of the. He won an award, just a Mainichi Fashion Award, which is like one of the biggest awards you can win for a fashion designer in Japan. And he has this very incredible technique where he can make everything out of like this flower design, and he can put it all over like maybe a dress or a pair of pants, and it looks phenomenal. But would I call that avant-garde? I would just call it an artistic expression of the contemporary, right? Like I wouldn't call it avant-garde. I would just say it's a different perspective. And so when we look at Ray is in this situation where every time you can almost expect to be surprised, right? Oh, that's odd, right? Like, right? Like I didn't expect that. So when you talk about, when we talk about like any label, like I think you really hit it on the head when we talk about like current Balenciaga or Vetements. Like I think the problem with those is that it's exactly the word that you said. It's super ironic. It's more on the ironic side and satire, almost parody, than it is on the actual position of challenging.
It was avant-garde at one point, but once you do something so many times, is it avant-garde
Yeah,
anymore?
yeah, it's not. It's like
Okay,
saying, it's
or
like,
that model like 20 times. Like now,
right,
like
like how many times are you gonna give
yeah,
me a double sweatshirt? Like,
yeah,
right,
exactly.
right. Like it's like when you say, "Oh, what about Yoji?" It's like, yeah, Yoji is now an acceptable silhouette
It's a
that,
wonderful
and
silhouette.
it's wonderful. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great, but it's an acceptable silhouette. In fact, I'd say it's one of the most influential silhouettes, one of the most influential silhouettes in fashion. Like there's so many people who take from Yoji Yamamoto and have. I mean, even this era where the pants have gotten wider, you get in the wide to tapered cuts. That's Yoji, like early
very
Yoji Yamamoto. Like some of it is other designers as well, but that's what I see. And at one point, yeah, it was looked at as if like, who is going to wear this? This is so odd. This is so out of the blue, out of lockstep with what we're doing in fashion. And that's what makes the avant-garde. When people actually have I think the key is when people have a negative reaction to it. That's
mm.
the key. Like the key
And
when,
that's the reaction that you get with early Ray, and even Ray.
yes,
Not as much with Ray today, but you still get, ooh, that's weird.
yeah, like
Especially with early Vetements or Balenciaga, where
that's
it's like, who the hell would wear a T-shirt that says like something like that on that charge like $900 for Ratatouille or something like that? It's just like
right. It's just
difficult.
like, who is
It's
going to do that? Right? Who is going to champion that? And I think that's the key. And I don't think any label, and honestly, I think because of the mainstreamness of fashion today, uh very few labels would go in that direction. Even very few designers will go in that direction. I think we're in an era of, if I could give it a title, premeditated elegance, right? Where basically people are, even designers are being very thoughtful in how they want, how they expect people to wear clothes. So it's premeditated. I know somebody's going to wear this in this particular way, and I want to make it, as a designer. If you're, say, you're a fashion designer, trained fashion designer, one of the key elements of fashion is this idea of elegance, not just making things pretty, but making things that fit well, that are within the cultural zeitgeist of today. So a premeditated idea of how they expect people to present themselves. I think that's the reason why Ray is one of the foremost, is because I don't think she's thinking about that. I don't think she has a premeditated idea of how somebody's gonna wear this. She's just like, I want to make this, and there you go, right? But I think most designers have, especially Western designers, because they're so influenced by commercial idea, by like capital, that
yeah,
their career is hangs in the balance if they don't create something that people will wear, right? And
yeah.
that is why I think the avant-garde, the chances have been, the chances that people would have taken in the past are just not viable today, especially in a world where fashion is so fast. It's so fast. The turnover is incredible right now. I don't think most people understand how fast
I
a,
mean,
a brand can be in and out.
it's crazy because Kenny Wajima can wear a Capital hoodie, and then like next thing you know, Zara has it on their thing with it just missing the tag.
Yeah.
It's like these small like micro influencers that you and I know about who are like connected to us will wear something.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
see it on Zara or like what's these things, and you'll be like, what? I just saw so and so wear that, and I've seen that piece on Grailsville for
Right.
a lot lower, like before they wore it, and
Right.
now
Like
it's
how does
Zara.
H&M,
Yeah,
catch wind of Capital and use something from Capital? And it
you're
just
like,
lets you know that they have their ear to the ground. Uh
wow.
that it's it's hard. It's hard. Like when I tell people about Capital, like for instance, this is a great segue into this label. But when I tell people about Capital, it's always interesting because I have to say, Capital is Capital popular in Japan? Eh, Right? Like
I know.
it's not like people are lining up to buy Capital, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not like. But what's funny is that when say a Westerner comes to Japan, it's like, yeah, we're gonna go to Capital stores. Like, man, that stuff that I want might be sold out. I'm like, not likely, right? Right? Like
It
it's
might
not,
be sold out for you.
right?
Because Capital was kind of this take on Americana from Japan that
Right.
people from America really like.
Like it's like, dog. Like you might like you have to understand. Like it's popular for people who I would say this. I think when you want to talk about, just to extend the conversation about avant-garde, I think what I said about premeditated elegance, but also I think where it has shifted is the idea of style. I think style has probably entered into this era of the avant, right? Like not necessarily the brands, but the people who put together certain things that I've never seen that before. I've never seen somebody pull that off like that before. So not necessarily the the artistic take that is just different, right? Like that, that can't be pulled off. But how did that one person think of that thing in that way? How did they put those things together, right? Because I've never seen it, or I haven't seen it enough to actually have that be acceptable to me. So I think, like me wearing Yoji Yamamoto and wearing the three layered pants and pulling it off with a knit tie and a elongated collared shirt like what I'm wearing today, and you know wearing a pair of, I don't know, maybe wearing a pair of Fragment Jordan 3s and being able to pull it off, right? I think that is where we start getting into the avant, like the idea of what artistic expression through style. If I'm being a little bit more specific, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I think it's headed, because I think we're in the TikTok generation, right? This is TikTok generation. Everybody has these different outfits, everybody has these different takes, and everybody's doing different things because they're competing with each other in a style format that is, let's just, so immediate, right? So they have to come up with these bombastic takes. And I think that is where we're headed. I think the labels are just providing the tools, so to speak.
Interesting. No, you're probably very right about that because on the internet, it's like Bloody Osiris maybe is a good example of that if you're familiar with him. He might be one of the first to really pull off some very strange outfits, some
Mm-hmm.
very strange styling, you know. And it's kind of gone in that direction when you look at what is avant-garde. It's kind of all that. You see a lot of people styling Moss, Balenciaga, in even stranger ways than they're
Mm-hmm.
on
I
in the
mean,
runway.
if you want to take somebody who's uber popular, even Kanye West, like even Kanye West, when he wears a mask, when he
Yeah,
wears those big snow boots that he has, he's wearing big jeans. Like I'm gonna be real. I've never seen anybody wear kind of the stuff that he's wearing quite like the way that he's wearing, and with confidence. Like like this is what it is. And here's the crazy thing. A lot of people have a negative reaction to it. They don't like it. They be like,
mm,
man, I don't know about that, yay, man. What happened to the old, yeah? What happened to the old dude? But
what
that's
happened to the
exactly the
backpack and
point.
polo? Yeah,
Huh?
what happened to the backpack and polo?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. What happened, man? Like, I want you to go back to that, but it's so aggressive. It's so abrasive that how can we not say it's challenging the idea of what can and cannot be worn, right? Like, if there's anything that I can give Kanye any kudos on, is that at least he's trying different stuff. Like, he's trying stuff that nobody, like, not that many people in that space are trying, and he's doing it in a way that is, what's crazy is that he's a very eccentric and public person, but his clothes are being worn in a very, this is what I do, I don't care what you say kind of way. It's not like you should do it too, or give you the middle finger because I'm wearing this dress and it's against society. For him, it's like, I wear this. This is what I do. And if you have a problem with it, then you just have a problem. That's what I can actually, that's why I can say probably the avant-garde goes to people in styles, right? And that's when it's up to us as people who engage with it, whether it be from a designer perspective or a styling perspective or a fashion perspective, to look at fashion in different ways and try those different ways, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for inspiration, and that's how I, generally feel about it. That's a good question, Karsten.
Thank you, I appreciate
That's a
it.
good one.
Kanye is definitely probably one of the few. He's definitely pushed the avant-garde in the United States, at least. I don't know how much that influence is seen in Japan.
Yeah, no, I think it's crazy.
But,
like, people know about him in Japan, but they're just like, because you can't have hip hop concerts in Japan, which is weird.
oh,
Yeah.
wait, really?
Yeah, no,
Why
it's
is
like, it you can, but it's like, it's they're very selective, because of
Mm.
drugs,
Oh,
because like marijuana is completely outlawed in this country, to the point where if you do it, you'll get smacked down with like a 20-year sentence. It's pretty bad. Yeah,
holy
like, yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm from Seattle, where it's like there's a marijuana
Weed.
shop on every
Like, what are you talking about?
away, and I'm like, whoa, that's kind of weird.
Like, dude,
But,
I can go up the street right now.
yeah, no, I guess I don't really want to, but
Right?
that's interesting. Oh, that's crazy. I never knew that, because like for me, I know of like a lot of interesting punk like adjacent bands that are like very technical, like very craft oriented punk bands are super popular in Japan. So I've seen a
Mhm.
lot of videos of them performing in Japan as opposed to performing in other places because they're very
Right.
popular there. But no, hip hop is not popular in Japan because marijuana is a problem.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's popular as a music, as a music genre. People listen to it,
Yeah.
like, but very few, far in between, do like hip hop acts get a chance to operate in Japan. Because think about it. Think about all the rappers, Travis Scott has never performed in Japan, right? Like,
Really, I've seen a video of him in Japan.
he's in, but he didn't
He's
perform.
here.
Like, he did. Like, these cats ain't performing here like that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he did, right? But it's few, far in between. I would have heard about it if he, like, there would have been thousands, uh,
Interesting.
thousands of people would have let me know. You know, and tour. Travis Scott coming to Japan. You know what I'm saying? Like. Oh yeah, he was at Imagination. He was at Japan Live for Imagination. So he was here, right, in 2021. So it might be getting a little bit more less lax. Oh wait, hold up. Maybe I'm being wrong.
He was
Hold
there
up.
in like 2013 because this
Yeah,
was when I was really into Travis Scott,
yeah.
and I
Hold
saw an
up.
interview. It was like, "Oh, I'm in Japan for a day," and I was like, "Wow, that's
Yeah,
cool."
you're right. It was 2013. You're right.
I was
2013.
right on here.
You know what? 2013. Yeah. You know
Wow.
what? Because I think it happened after this. So I may be wrong, I may be right, but there was this big deal in Japan when hip hop acts were coming to Japan. They were always bringing like weed, and they were bringing weed into the country. So um they stopped they like had a very like harsh rule on hip hop acts in Japan. And so the last time that Travis Scott was in Tokyo was in to not to perform but just to be here was in, I think it was 2018.
Mhm.
No, he was here 2015 because he was doing a tour with Minami Stacks. I know who she is. So yeah, like it's weird. Like, you don't see a lot of hip hop acts in Japan performing here because of
That's not
just they say the community that surrounds it, right?
okay.
It's very vague language, but like, you don't, like, I would know if there's a hip hop concert happening in Japan because everybody would let me know. It's like, yo, did you go to XYZ concert in Japan? But they don't happen. They
So
don't
you
happen.
have not been to a hip hop concert in a long time, and
Not in
that's
Yeah.
stemming from your roots of coming into like fashion from hip
The
hop.
last hip hop concert that I was in Japan was Summer Sonic of It may have been 2012.
Oh wow.
It may, and that's almost 10 years, right? Like,
Blow your mind?
yeah, it blows my mind. Like
Oh wow.
2012. Wow. Like,
Wow.
how old did I get? Right? Like, like, it's like, how old are you
Like
really? Like, you've been here for
I,
10 years? Like, what's going
you
on?
know,
Right?
this is what got me into it, and now I haven't seen a. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
like if you look at like concerts in Japan, like I'm looking at it right now. It's just like I'm trying to find like Japanese hip hop artists uh can perform, of course.
Yeah.
Because like Cole, he's always over here doing concerts in Japan, right? So yeah, no, and they can go to clubs. So like hip hop acts from America can go to clubs and perform there, but not big like
Venues.
venues, right?
Interesting.
So there you go. Yeah,
Wow.
haven't been there in a while.
There's a very like anti-drug presence in Japan.
Yeah, yeah, you're not.
Wow. Even with marijuana and like
Even with like people smoke, but like right, but people smoke, but I mean it's it's not like if you
your
went
thing.
to LA or you went to Seattle and being like, can I get something and it's easy. It's more
Yeah.
like you have to be on the in crowd with the in crowd and knowing somebody. Right?
Wow.
Like it's not hard, it's just that it's few far in between.
Interesting. Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah.
That is my fun fact about Japan that I did not know
Fun
is that
fact
if
about Japan is that
I ever go there, I'm like, where's the dispensary? It's 20 years.
yeah, yeah, like yeah, you might want to go across the ocean again, buddy. Right? Like it's difficult, right?
Interesting.
So
Okay.
it's a weird dynamic over here, and just they just had enough. It had happened too often, too many times, and then they shut it down, right? It's almost like an unofficial rule. So there you
Wow.
go.
That's super interesting. But there is still a fan base, I assume, too.
Oh
Over there.
yeah, 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 yeah. There's plenty of fans of hip hop in Japan. Like they love it over here. I
Because I
mean,
know old hip hop band tees are like a grail.
God, like there's literally vintage stores out here that are selling old Snoop Dogg tees. Uh, they just go to America, buy all the old hip hop tees, come back to Japan, sell them for like $200, right? And
I have,
and there's literally a channel on YouTube right now of a dude who explains like, yeah, this shirt right here, it's vintage one. This is about $300. $300, I can get that for like $2, bro. Like,
well, that's my like upbringing is I would get these and I don't know how these prices got inflated in the first place. I don't know if it was from Fear of God originally or from Japan,
mm,
which these collector tees. But I have a tee that I was able to get for like $2 off a guy on the street. I remember looking it up and I got it $600 on eBay, and I was like, oh
yeah,
yeah,
no, I would have to say it's
yeah.
probably a combination of both, man, because Japan has been doing this for a long time. If you go to like a place called like there's a store in Harajuku Street called Burbage, right?
Mm,
Burbage is this store that carries black means, right?
mm,
So it carries this brand is kind of a punk inspired label. Black Means is an amazing, handcrafted leather craft label. It's just amazing.
yeah,
But also in that store, along with new Black Means, they carry vintage band tees, like vintage tees from all around wherever they travel.
mm,
You start picking, they have them neatly folded up on the rack, and you're looking at it, and you pull it out, and the lowest price I've ever seen for one is like $90, and that was from like a no name brand that no name band that no that nobody really cares about anymore, or maybe they do, but the highest, the average was at least 150,
yeah.
and the highest being like 300 or 500. It was nuts. I was just going through the like this is a place in Japan like if you want to buy a double XL Levi's jacket,
Mm.
it'll cost you $200. A
Yeah,
vintage double XL Levi's jacket will cost you $200 easy. You cannot buy a vintage Levi's jacket in Japan for under $100. It's just not gonna happen.
That's interesting. There's this place that my friend works at actually in Seattle, and most of its customers are people coming over from Japan looking for Americana, and this place like designates itself as like the place if you're coming to America from Japan and you're looking for vintage Levi's or like
Mm-hmm.
vintage panties. My friend works there, and he tell like the prices there are up for the United States, but they're like 1950s, 1930s, like
Mm-hmm.
Levi's. These are like the collectors of the collectors stuff,
Right.
and they price them pretty high. And I know, like he was telling me the other day, this guy who owns a pretty big vintage shop in Japan. I don't know which one because I'm not attuned to that, but he told me this guy came in and bought almost about like pretty much 3 crates worth of stuff just to bring back.
Yeah,
Just to
he's
ship
about to he's about to sell
gonna
those.
resell it here.
He's about to sell those. That's exactly the point. Like, I don't. I typically tell most people in America about like the fashion game in Japan is, it's not new stuff. It's old stuff. Like 100%. The people who wear new stuff are, even the people who wear old stuff, it's kind of crazy, like vintage stuff. Everybody is willing to spend a premium on things that they cannot normally get. Like everybody who's involved in fashion, if they have disposable income to any degree, they are willing to spend the extra money on these pieces. So if you're talking about Levi's jeans, if you're talking about vintage shirts, you're talking about some pants that you just can't get anywhere except in America. Like, and you might be if you're a dad in America right now and you have a attic full of vintage Levi's jeans, you probably have a gold mine. You're probably sitting on a gold mine for a Japanese person. They'll
Yeah.
spend, like, I know dudes who will spend 5K on a pair of vintage Levi denim jeans. Like, I personally know them. They'll be like, yo. And then, yeah, easy. They'll just ask me, like, Reggie, do you, like, I remember having a conversation with one of my good friends over here. And just asked me straight up, hey, do you know anybody in America that will sell me some vintage Levi's? Right? You know anybody? Because you're American, right? Like you're from California, right? Like I know Levi's popular in California, right? I'm like, yeah, I guess. He's like, do you know anybody? I'm like, I guess I can ask some people, right? Like I don't, He's like, yeah, those are the kind I want. I literally was like, I don't know a store, and he's like, yeah, no, I don't need stores. I just need people, because that's all they want, right? Like it's weird. Like it's not weird. It's just how much they appreciate what's already been there, right? That's already been through
the gutter.
The gutter, the paces, to speak. It's a different society altogether.
It's similar in Europe, though. I've spent some time in Europe, and I just remember, not necessarily with clothes, but with like other things. I remember having this conversation with this woman, and she's like, "I never live in a new house, never."
Yeah.
This doesn't.
Why would I live in a new house? That doesn't make any sense.
Really, it's good. It's like it's nice, and she's like, "No, it doesn't have like the ghosts in it or whatever." And I was like, "Ghosts?" And she's like, "Oh, I mean the character," but like I was like, "You said ghosts."
No, that's not what you said. You said ghosts, right? No, I completely agree. Like, it's very similar. It's very similar to that idea. It's just everything is lived in. I mean, even I would say that Japan is a mixture of, how would I explain it? Japan is a mixture of New York, Southern California, and in terms of like ideology, and I'd say France, like Paris, like I'd say that that's really the, if I were to combine it, right? It would definitely be that. It would definitely be like France, Southern California, and of course New York. And then what you have is, in those areas, the people, like when it comes to fashion, it's like the people who are like one big country of subcultures. like one big country of people who involve themselves in the subcultures, right? Like that's just what fashion is in Japan as far as the ideology and how they take it. And you could see those influences easily. Like you could walk up the street and see a Japanese person in a beret and be like, okay, like, with a beret, military, vintage military jacket from Germany, right? like they'll have a, German military jacket hanging over their shoulders with a beret and a pink shirt on the inside with, some oversized Levi distressed denim jeans that are from 1994, right? Like post, like it's incredibly intense. That's why I say when you come to Japan, like I think in Europe you can honestly say that fashion is chic, smart, right? Like
Yes.
very smart chic.
It's very smart, and
Yeah.
it's not as avant-garde, I think, as people in the United States think it would be.
Right. Right.
I
Like
remember going over there. I was like, yeah, there's gonna be people I see all the time who are in all these cool designers who are from Europe. Like, like I'm gonna see some Anne, I'm gonna see some Raph, I'm gonna see some a Rick or something. I don't know.
mhm.
It's just like it's all very chic.
Right.
Um,
Like it's just like, it's like the ultimate version of chic, smart, right? Like it's like
it's in a lot of you'll like see some nice things every once in a while, but it's not like
right.
nobody's ever dressed badly, but nobody's ever dressed. You don't ever see anybody who's like, wow, they got off like a crazy fit very
Right.
often.
In
I mean, like you said,
Japan,
I would expect in Japan maybe.
yeah, you see in Japan it's more frequent like that you see people who are wearing incredibly uh like it gave like you see these ideas, you'll see it more frequent, right? You'll see these more incredible outfits more frequently, but generally Japan follows the a very European model, right? When it
Yes.
comes to chicness, right? Like, but here's the great thing about Japan: fashion has doesn't have the ageist element added to it. So you can literally find a Japanese dude who's wearing something that you would probably see somebody who's 3 times younger than him wearing it in California, right?
Yeah.
But that Japanese dude is wearing it better. Like not in the sense of like they pulled it off better, like that's their culture. Like he's pulling it off in the most chic way that you could possibly wear it, and it still works. Like I've never seen like so many 50+ year olds who look like who take on a style and pull it off with just a plum, right? Like if that's the greatest word, that's the best word I can use. They don't look out of place. They look like they were supposed to be wearing that. It's like they wear that culture on their sleeve. It's very, very interesting to watch. It's very inspirational because it means that there is no age on fashion for them, right? This is what they do. But then at the same time, you might see a 50+ year old dude and his wife who both are walking up and down the streets of Omotesando with Yoji Yamamoto and Comme des Garçons,
Mhm.
right? Like and yeah, I think somebody mentioned. I'm actually looking at the chat a little bit. Yeah, intention. It's intentional. Everything is intentional. Every little small detail that you can think about. It's one of the few things that I've tried to employ in my fashion style ideology, but I'm still learning it. Like I'm still like, golly, how do you do that? Like I'm still so impressed by it that it's mind-boggling to say the least. I love it. I love it, but I'd say for the general sense, I think it's more so the European. If we're looking at it from a bird's eye point of view, more people dress in a chic way than with Japanese elements attached than seeing some of these crazy outfits. Although the frequency of which you see those crazy outfits is much higher in Japan than anywhere else I've ever been.
Hey, I would guess. I
Yeah.
That's the only place I can imagine it being
Yeah.
besides New York Fashion Week or
Yeah, like
Fashion Week or Paris Fashion Week, where all the weirdos
Yeah, yeah,
decide.
where all the weirdos come out of there. Like, I think Japan is like like you just I can go outside in Japan today.
Mhm.
I can go listen. I live fairly close to the the major hubs, but I can go out in my neighborhood today and I can find somebody who's
Yeah.
quite out there as far as their take in fashion.
Hmm.
Like
Interesting.
just in walking up and down, like I can go to the grocery store and I'm pretty sure I can find somebody. Right? I
Yeah.
saw a girl yesterday. I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have done that myself, but she pulled it off. Right? So that's what I think is the best thing about Japan. And what's the last thing I'll say about that is you one thing I could say about Japan is that there's so many perspectives, right? Like there's so many. Like you get like how do you pull that off and you're immediately it's like a confidence booster once you see somebody else do it. You're like, "Oh, okay. I see how that's done." And so all the rules get thrown out the window. You're just like I can pull that off here. And you're more likely to pull it off in Japan because it's a more open fashion society, I would say.
Maybe it's because of the ambiguity.
Yep. Yeah. There. Hey, I like what you did there.
Maybe, I don't know.
No,
You might be on
I think you're absolutely. I think you're 100% right. Because Japanese tend to have a lack of giving an opinion on somebody like just straight up. If that's what you do, that's what you do, dude. Like whatever. Like nobody's gonna be like, can't believe like why like give you ugly looks. So like why are they wearing that? It's just like whatever. Like gotta move on. I think it's just a very fast society in that regard. But occasionally they will compliment you on your fashion.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Um, yeah, they will say something like, "Ooh, I like that. I like what you did there." Like I went to a fabric show and I was wearing a piece and they were like, the guy at the who was at one of his booths was like, I like this piece that you're wearing. And I was like, oh, thank you. Right? So, right. Because I was like, for a Japanese person to be impressed by something, I'm like, I must have did something right. So, like, that's,
Yeah, exactly. I
right.
would go there to be embarrassed.
Right. Like, I'd be like, oh, great. Oh. Like, I did something. Right. So, yeah, there you go. Anything else?
I think that's it. I think
Man,
we hit a lot.
Karsten,
It's been
Karsten,
good.
Karsten, it's been great having you on the show. I really, really appreciate you coming through, man. I would love to have you on again so we can talk more about fashion, more about so many things. We had a couple of technical difficulties at the beginning. For anybody who didn't catch um, this full thing, this will be posted on the main channel so you can rewatch it later. You had a lot of great insight, man, on this. It went glowingly. I really appreciate your insight on this. And again, hopefully we could talk more, maybe with some of our friends on here as well. It's always a game. But any last words for the people out there?
No, I appreciate it. Check me out. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. Karsten Kroening. It looks spelled weird. Go for it. I'd love to do more of this, and I'd love to do some more conversations at any time, man. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on. And as always, everybody, keep it locked right here. Oh, before I do that, follow Carson. Okay, all right. Follow him. Dude has some great takes. So yes, as always, keep it locked right here for all of your info in international fashion, culture, and business from Tokyo. It's your boy, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. And I'll see you guys in a minute. Peace. Wait, this is like the end part where I have to finish it, but that's okay.